What's up there, everybody? This, of course, welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media, of course, on. Let me make sure that that my live viewers can see by way of Twitter as well. Of course, you can follow me on social media on Twitter. Of course, at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at VictoryPod1. You can also follow me on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. All right, thank you very much. I'm glad to see that my Twitter's connected. A little technical difficulty, if you will. Sorry about that. But like I said, you can follow me on Twitter at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at VictoryPod1. You can follow me on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. And so on Monday, was Mike's last show of the year. So as far as that, just gave pretty much our yearly a recap of the year, and in terms of the world of wrestling, if you will. So as you all know, that this show, the core audience, much of it is dealing with wrestling, but also dealing with other topics as well. And of course, side note, I want to say that this past weekend, enjoyed a great Friendsmas, I guess you could say, the Christmas version of Friendsgiving. As far as I was concerned. Excuse me, Chick-fil-A earlier, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, of course, as well know, of course, NFL football. I'm going to give a recap of that. I'm also, also found out that that it's been announced that Avengers Doomsday, the trailer will. They announced, of course, Marvel announced the runtime for the trailer, and it's going to be 1:25. I believe it is. So it's been confirmed that we will officially be getting a legitimate trailer for Avengers Doomsday. I'm excited for that. Yeah, I know a lot of other people are excited as well, and I'm also been doing a little bit of WWE Christmas shopping, if you will. Can't wait for what arrives. Ordered the WrestleMania and Bianca Belair shirt. You can't spell WrestleMania without EST. And ordered a CM Punk shirt. I guess I gave it away. But yeah, but as far as that, this weekend is going to be a huge, major, weekend. Of course, here in DC, because it's going to be John Cena's last match. And DC's going to go all the way out. Have a fan fest for 4 hours, from 2 to 6, and then, of course, going to the Saturday night's main event. This city's going to go all the way out, when it comes to Cena. Well deserved, and I'm going to go more into that in a minute. But I'm going to first and foremost, I want to give give my NFL recap as well. Since the season is it's definitely drawing near to a close, to a conclusion. Not too many games left, and so let's see. All right, week. As a matter of fact, this past week was of course, was week 14. Start off, the Lions defeated the Dallas Cowboys 44-30. The Tennessee Titans defeat the Cleveland Browns 31-29. The Seattle Seahawks destroyed the Falcons 37-9. The Jaguars defeat the Colts 36-19. The Vikings shut out the Commanders 31-0. The Bills defeat the Bengals in the game of the week 39-34. The Saints defeat the Buccaneers 24-20. The Steelers defeat the Ravens 27-22. The Dolphins wipe out the Jets 34-10. The Broncos defeat the Raiders, division rivals, 24-17. The Rams just steamrolled the Cardinals 45-17. Of course, Matthew Stafford being the MVP talks. The Packers defeat the Bears, division rivals, the Bears, 28-21. Of course, like I said, as far as the prime time games of the week. The Texans defeat the Chiefs 20-10. Kansas City's looking like they're going through a decline right now. And on Monday Night Football, in overtime, the Chargers defeat the Eagles 22-19. And now it looks like starting to see more chinks in the armor of Kansas City, as they are now 6-7. Not like that song, but yeah, I'm gonna say 6-7. I'm even gonna go there with that, but yeah, like I said, that's Kansas City's record. They have more losses than they have wins. As I say all the time, this is not what I expected, aka not on my bingo card. I need to write a book about that at this point. But yeah, as Kendrick would say, paraphrase Kendrick, when it comes to Kansas City, the superpowers get neutralized. I can only watch in silence. So, and definitely seeing Kansas City's looking more vulnerable than they've ever looked. And we're getting closer and closer to not seeing Taylor Swift in the Super Bowl. And so, sorry about that. And all like I say, of course, I also want to get to my wrestling news in a minute. But I'm a big NBA fan as well. And clearly, a lot of NBA content is these days geared toward rage bait, right? And I know that Paul Pierce, I'm convinced that dude must have basketball CTE or something. With the stuff he said about Jordan not having much of a bag. A bag is an arsenal of, offensive arsenal, to get to the hoop. And so I'm glad that, Kevin Garnett, shut him down and really checked him on it. And, and the thing about it is that, it's just like so much of this content is, like I said, is really geared toward a lot of rage bait. People, just saying things just to say them and without having validity behind it. But but like I said, I saw the clip, with Garnett, like I said, really shut him down, put him in his place. He told Pierce that that he told Pierce, you've gone from speaking to the next generation to speaking for them. And the thing about it is that these hot takes have really, really gotten out of control. What made someone like Jordan so great is because he did have a deep bag of of moves, whether it was dunks, layups, like I say, certain dribbles. He didn't have to do a whole lot of dribbling, before he got his shot off. Creating shots off the dribble. Like I say, just in terms of just the variety of ways that he was able to get to the basket. Like I said, whether it was to the basket, mid range, minimal amount of 3-pointers, if you will. Like I say, of course, like off his pivot, doing pivot moves. Of course, obviously patent fade away. All these different moves and arsenals. In order to be arguably the greatest scorer of all time, a 10-time scoring champion, you got to have a deep enough bag. In order for someone to have 20 to 30,000 points, you got to have a pretty deep bag. And so I just feel as though people are getting way too comfortable, saying insane things just for the sake of likes and clicks and reactions. And a big reason why I even launched this podcast was because I've seen too much of that. I've seen too much of too many hot takes and rage bait. Just off of wrestling alone. Not only that, but but even outside of that, when it comes to other sports like football and basketball. And I was like, I gotta have my own narrative, and and many times, reclaim certain narratives, if you will. Um, and so it's just like, you know what, like I said, when it comes to, like when it comes to some of Jordan's, you know, caliber, stature, you have these guys that say these things that are not in his league at all whatsoever, right? And I just felt as though I really have a need to, just to get this off my chest, before I go, before I go into, um, like I say, the wrestling topics and things like that, and like I said, the thing is, you know, um, with the way that Garnett responded, he spoke for uh, a lot of guys like myself who've reached that breaking point where it's just like, you know what, I can't hear too much of this. Um, where people have a problem with someone who's had established greatness, for the longest time, and now you want to be a contrarian and poke holes in an otherwise ironclad resume, and just question, what, what made them so special and things like that, without having to, like I say, even though, Jordan, is recent enough for you to have, have familiarize yourself with, right? Um, and a matter of fact, his name still carries weight even to this day, right? And so, with the way, they see these younger fans and younger players and even guys like Pierce who are haters, the way that they want to, dilute, do their best to try to dilute, Michael's legacy and his, resume and stuff like that. We try to reduce him to being just another guy. I think it's asinine. I think it's insane. I think it's disrespectful, and a lot of these guys, have recycled what he's done, and quite frankly, haven't done it better than him, you know. So, in my estimation, come back and talk to me with somebody, can average, 37 points a game and, score over, 3,000 points in a season. Like when it comes to Jordan, as far as like anybody outside of Jordan and Wilt, so you got to have a pretty deep enough bag to do something like that, and then also, with the way that I've said over and over, especially with the way that people getting too comfortable talking reckless about Kobe, especially since he's not here to defend himself, and that's why, I applaud Lou Williams, for someone else, to come to his defense, because I feel as though these have way too many conversations to question where he ranks all the time. When once upon a time didn't even have to be a discussion. You know, um, and now it's opening up the doors for people to try to throw, someone like Tracy McGrady's name in there, Gilbert, who have you, who otherwise, were not in the same dimension as Kobe. But now, since he's not here, let's just, throw anybody next to his name. Um, you know, and the thing is, like I said, especially when it comes to Bleacher Report and all these other, hot take BS artists, it's just like, come on now. Like, I'm sure many of them don't really believe what they say themselves. So, what I mean? So it's just like, what, so, let me slow down. As far as I'm concerned, Kobe and Jordan have two of, the most ironclad, just legacies and what have you, um, of all time, outside of like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or something. And like I said, as far as that's concerned, I just feel as though, they are where they are, and don't need to be, compared with guys who are not of their caliber. And let's, pretty much just leave it at that as far as I'm concerned. Um, you know, and one of the things for me, is all about defending greatness, giving a case to why, someone is the all-time great, even though their numbers speak for themselves, you know. Um, so that's how I am, when it comes to this. That's how I am when it comes to defending, when it comes to defending someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin or John Cena, Shawn Michaels, Roman, guys like that. I keep the same energy all across the board, no matter what. You know, so these BS hot takes just getting way overboard. But yeah, like I said, that just had to kind of get that off my soapbox a little bit. But like I said, moving on to the weekend wrestling, Friday Night SmackDown, Monday Night Raw, NXT, and my Saturday night, main event predictions. So we see that, like I said, of course, as far as, the key matches, that took place on SmackDown, it really wasn't too much that, that went on. We saw that Gunther defeated LA Knight in the last time is now tournament final. Alexa Bliss defeated Kairi Sane with the sister Abigail DDT. Ilya Dragunov defeated Carmelo Hayes with the H-bomb. And I know a lot of people were screaming justice for Melo. He definitely deserves better. And of course, Jade Cargill defeated Alba Fire with Jaded to retain the WWE Women's Championship. And side note, Liv Morgan has also been added to, and of course, added to the women's poker table, for WrestleMania 42 when they go back to Vegas. Like I said, as far as that's, of course, like I said, as far as that's concerned, so Liv Morgan, has officially been added to the table, and I know, of course, Bianca Belair. It's only a matter of time before she's added as well, because you cannot spell WrestleMania without the EST. So, with that being, of course, with that being said, as far as the major moments of SmackDown, of course, after Alexa's win, Nia Jax, the Last Legend, attacked her. Charlotte Flair and the Kabuki Warriors, as they both held up the women's tag titles, as they've thrown their name into the hat to challenge for those belts. Then we have Cody Rhodes versus Drew McIntyre. And Cody and Drew had a tense confrontation leading to future potential clashes, but it's so one-sided, just for Cody to keep the title. I'm like, for what? And you see that the Obafemi that definitely has his eyes on Cody now. And we have new tag challenges. The division is going to heat up, of course, with Jade Cargill and Nia Jax, new teams like DIY and Andrade, as well as Ray Phoenix. So, of course, like I said before, Gunther has officially won the last time, and the last time is now tournament, and and of course, like I said, of course, he defeated LA Knight, and of course, LA Knight by way of submission. And as the show was going off the air, Gunther screams at the camera. He said, "I hope you're paying attention. At Saturday night's main event, you finally and definitely will give up." That was his message to John Cena. So we're having a classic heel versus face, match that'll be a great pairing. Of course, in Washington D.C., Cena versus Gunther for the first and only time. So of course, as far as I'm concerned, those were the main highlights for SmackDown. And let me see. Now, when it comes to Monday Night Raw, we see that Jay is not main event anymore. Of course, we see that the Usos have reunited to challenge for the WWE Tag Team Championships. Of course, after AJ Styles and Dragon Lee defeated, the Viking Raiders by way of pinfall. Like I said, this one Usos interrupted, saying they were back in the tag team mix, and they would remove the classic rivalry with the New Day on the way back to another tag team championship. And it clearly goes to show that this Yeet experiment, was not what they thought it would be. And once again, I keep going back to the episode of Unreal, where Jay was, greatly exposed, for someone who was not ready, for someone, who would blow up as he was hitting the ropes, meaning he, uh, blowing up in wrestling, means he would get exhausted or out of breath, you know, and a lot of his promos, were limited to becoming a caricature of himself, right? When it comes to his, arsenal, or as we say, bag as a singles wrestler, there's so much left to be desired, where you really couldn't take him that seriously. You know what I mean? So, as far as I'm concerned, that's a big, you know, uh, big red flag, if you will, right? And so, and just goes to show, I feel as though they gave him a 90 on 2K 24 and 25 for no reason. You know what I mean? Like, just for the sake of it, just for being in the heat of the moment. You know? But his best work is as a tag team specialist. Not everybody is going to have the Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Edge, Booker T, post tag team singles career. No matter how hard they push Jay and give him opportunities after opportunities after opportunities to the point where he even beat Gunther at WrestleMania. But that was very short-lived because the ring general, would eventually reclaim the championship. So it's just like, even that wasn't convincing, because we know, that Gunther just outclasses Jey Uso, skill wise in the ring, but and of course, like I said, it's only a matter of time before the Usos will reunite anyway. But other than that, I digress. We see, of course, on Monday Night Raw, we see that the Vision remains dominant force on Mondays. We saw that Logan Paul beat down Rey Mysterio and picked up a win over LA Knight with the help of his stablemates, Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed. So by the end of the night, Paul Heyman had been helped twice by the same masked man who helped his team win in War Games. So then Logan Paul, Bron. Of course, Logan and Bronson continued to beat down LA Knight before Bronson hit a tsunami on the top of the car. And this is, you want to talk about, RIP to LA Knight's, main event career push. You know what I mean? So it's just like, as far as, so you go from getting beat by Gunther to, to just getting squashed all together. So early in the show, we saw Logan Paul in the locker room with the rest of the Division. As Paul was furious about Rey Mysterio slapping in the face last weekend. That's when he called Paul Heyman aside and said the rest of the Division as back. He had their back in the future. Leading to Heyman, of course, handing Logan his brass knuckles. And of course, like I said, we saw Logan Paul defeat LA Knight by way of pinfall with a frog splash. And so, so of course, after the match, like I said, that's when Bron Breakker hit LA Knight with a spear before a pair of tsunamis from Bronson Reed, including the tsunami on that car. And after the match, Bron Breakker cut a promo claiming that when he faces CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship, he wants the old CM Punk, not the current nice guy, CM Punk. And Bron's, promos have really been growing and really been improving. And, you want to talk about the guy who wants to, and CM Punk's known for pipe bombs anyway. I guess, like I said, I guess Bron wants to have his own pipe bombs to himself. And so let me pull up this quote. So you want to talk about the ether moment right here. Now, where's that? Oh, yeah, here it is. So during the promo, Bron Breakker says this: imagine preaching your entire career. Every single week, I'm straight edge. I've never done drugs a day in my life. I've never had a sip of alcohol. And then it turns out he ends up looking like the biggest crackhead anybody's ever seen. I was like, whoa, whoa. All right, now you want to drop a pipe bomb of your own? That was ruthless. And not only that, but Bron also says that that he would not only take CM Punk's title, but he would even take his wife. I said, "Oh, this is a menace right here. This is absolute menace to society for sure." Um, and the thing is, like I said, this vision, the purpose, ultimately for me, when it comes to the vision, was to elevate brutality. And I always felt as though Bron Breakker would be the biggest benefactor um, of this faction, and it looks like it's definitely paying off. Uh, but let's backtrack. Of course, we saw that Gunther open the show with a promo. He vowed to not only beat John Cena's Saturday Night's Main Event, but to break Cena's spirit and to make him quit. We saw that Io Sky defeated Kairi Sane by way of pinfall with an over the moonsault, and Rhea Ripley eventually made her way to ringside to nullify Kairi's advantage of having Asuka there. Of course, the chaos would ensue, which allowed Io to pick up the victory. And like I said, for the World Tag Team Championships, you saw that AJ Styles and Dragon Lee retain the titles by defeating the Viking Raiders by way of pinfall after AJ Styles did a phenomenal form on Ivar. After the match, like I said, the New Day confronted the champs before the Usos would interrupt. So they were back in the mix. As I said earlier.
Just don't want you to dream so big that you can crush, baby. Yeah. Okay. It was just a fun. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway, sorry about that. Abbott Elementary in the background, but I'll watch that later. But anyway, like I said, the Usos are going to renew their rivalry with the New Day on their, of course, on their journey back to another tag team championship. We see the AJ Styles is on the twilight of his career. So he's definitely having one last really nice run, and salute to him for that. He also saw that Raquel Rodriguez, of course, confronted Stephanie Bakir, and of course Raquel was actually wearing a Houston Texans shirt the night after Texas defeated the Chiefs. But anyway, other than that, like I said, she confronted Stephanie Bakir. Bakir said that she talks through actions rather than words. So we saw that, of course, Jackie Bretman interviewed Stephanie Bakir. Bakir said, said that she talks through actions rather than words before Nikki Bella came to the ring, demanded a rematch after losing Survivor Series before Nikki could even get too far with Raquel Rodriguez entered the picture, and took out the trash by throwing Nikki into the ring post before coming face to face with Stephanie. So definitely like to see that. As far as that's concerned, and we have Roxanne Perez defeat Lyra Valkyria by way of pinfall with Pop Rocks, and Liv Morgan interfered multiple times, finally breaking, of course, Lyra's eyes to set the finish. And so of course Liv Morgan make sure to be in Roxanne's corner, especially since Raquel is already tied up with Stephanie Bakir, pretty much in terms of Liv Morgan, I'd say being eased right back into right back into his faction, and so of course, John Cena discussed his final in-ring run with WWE. He says, I can't match it with the product now, and that's okay. And so Cena, is talking about how his body can't really hold up that much longer, even though he was also on Bill Simmons' podcast mentioning how the original plan was for, the original idea was for him to have of course, to have a full-time schedule of 200 days this year, right? And instead of making 36 appearances, whatever, what have you, just being truncated. And so yeah, and the thing about it is that it's just like just looking at the way that Triple H has booked this very, very sideways. And so this retirement tour could have been so much more, than what we got out of it. The main highlights for me were Cena breaking Flair's record, even though uh, that heel turn was nothing but a waste, because like I said, because of um, the payoff from it was minuscule. All we got was Fiend, 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 Travis Scott at WrestleMania, and nothing else. And so especially with The Rock, admitting that he only did that as a favor for Ariel Helwani, like I said, all for the sake of, all for the sake of raising ticket sales. And I was like, man, it was just a giant troll moment. So it was like I said, that was a major wasted opportunity. All that to turn heel for nothing. And then also, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, and then also, with the way, that the Cena's run was going to eventually, he ended up having to control his narrative and pretty much, force Triple H's arm, force his hand to for him and AJ, of course, this was after I lost to Lesnar, pretty much Cena clearly he was getting fed up, and we called up Triple H, and wanted that match with AJ Styles, and that's when, of course, we ended up getting a Clash in Paris, and that was incredible, phenomenal, no pun intended, and that's because Cena was taking control of his narrative. He's the one that's having this retirement, so why not make the most out of it? And when I say that, Cena versus AJ, in my estimation, was the best, match of this retirement tour, bar none. Um, then that says everything. Yeah. So yeah, so, uh, so like I said, I feel as though, Cena's run could have been so much more, you know. But I will say the highlights were him, making history by breaking Ric Flair's record and also becoming a Grand Slam champion. So if that ain't GOAT status, I don't know what else. I don't know what else will. But to go from the past, now it's time to the present and the future, as we look to, of course, as we look to NXT. And of course, the show opened up with a recap of NXT Deadline. We saw that. So we saw that Open Femi made his entrance. Talked about being a two-time NXT champion. Says this is true power. NXT was not the same without the ruler on top. And he's absolutely right. So the universe did what it does best, and found a way to correct itself. And so he reclaimed his title. So now he's done with Ricky Saints. Saturday night's main event will face Cody Rhodes, and he will look in his eye. And he won't see the future. He'll see the now. The ruler, the destroyer, the bringer of war, in all of his glory. And so I will say, I will agree with Mike and say that that the future of the WWE lies in NXT, especially when you look at Oba Femi, Trick Williams, and Javon Evans. I believe that they're the ones who are really, really leading the way, the most over there in NXT. So as far as that. However, Ricky Saints enters the picture once again. He wants to congratulate Oba on the prophecy fulfilled. His bag is liar because Femi did exactly what he said he was going to do, and that's why he shook his hand, because he's man enough to admit that Oba was the better man deadline. And Ricky said that on the drive home, he started thinking about what's next, and seeing Femi with the title really makes him feel like that was it. He'll never get a chance to regain the title again. But then you remember he's absolute Ricky Saints, and you think he's going to bow down and fade to the black. You got another thing coming, in for a rude awakening. So he's going to come down for what's his. He's going to stare back on course, and remember, it's 1-1. So he gave Oba a shot, and he's demanding his rematch for the NXT Championship. So he wants a tiebreaker in this case. Then it's when, of course, enter Javon Evans. So he didn't mean that. He's been watching Deadline over and over again. He was like, "What? Would you survive the Iron Survivor Challenge?" And because of that, that means he's earned an NXT Championship opportunity at New Year's Eve. They wonder why wait until January to have his match. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I think it was related to January myself. But who am I? Javon says he's on fire, he's locked in, ready, and nobody's going to dictate his moment. So Oba's picking up what he's putting down. He'll have his title match tonight. Oba for me shakes his hand, Ricky Saints. Ricky asks what's the rush if he's on fire. They have all these great matches, and he puts Evans on waiting until he gets his rematch so they can have the match. But yeah, so pretty much. So Oba's the man to beat, and if anybody gets the match tonight, it's going to be him. Of course, Ricky Saints, says it's his time, shakes his hand, and tells him to go get his. So that's really what it is. And then we have Jordan Grace, of course, Jordan Grace versus Kalani Jordan. Kalani wins by way of pinfall with a 450 splash. So yeah, of course we saw that Blake Monroe made her entrance for Open Challenge and got on the mic. She talks about the roster looking up to her as something of a role model. So she found herself in a giving mood and wants to give back. I mean, it's the season of giving anyway. So she says, so being the ferocious competitor she is, she's hosting an Open Challenge, and without further ado, we'll see which lucky lady gets the opportunity of a lifetime. So we saw the locker room empty. Blake says one at a time, and screams for Ava Rain. Big Hell attacks from behind and puts her in a double wrist lock, and Moreau taps out, and runs out the ring. You know what I mean? And so, which there's no match. Shallow Hill is interviewed backstage, talks scientifically about the biochemistry of nervousness. Says he's ready to whoop Lexis King's, what? They go to break. Then we have then end up going to break. Then Lexis King versus Shallow Hill. Shallow Hill wins by way of pinfall. The back suplex dropped into a neck breaker. And we see Ethan Page, of course, walking backstage. As of course, Ethan Page gets on the mic. Says it doesn't matter when it comes to his North American Championship and came to NXT to drink the fountain of youth and soak up as much knowledge as possible. It turns out he's the only guy asking the question. Nobody has the guts to ask. Athletes ask how to do best drop kick, but he asked how to hurt that guy's jaw. And he worked it out by trial and error, and with any warm body, this company calls pro wrestling. He says, but they're all for saying social media trying to earn that fingerprint photo with a childhood idol when they can stand back and stare at him while he stands in the ring holding his titles. And now we all have to watch John Cena have his final match in a few days and walk away for good. And he says about a week after he's gone, it'll be just a memory. Even a giant void to be filled by a man with a giant ego, inserts himself. Says by the same man who won the NXT Championship at record time, and then when he couldn't find a path back to it, he won the North American Championship and turned it into the most coveted prize in all of WWE. He says he could deserve a break. He kept going and won the Triple H Mixed Tag Team Championship, becoming one of one like no one else. And of course says the day you run to this world, the day you leave it, and the day you realize Ethan Page, the biggest superstar WWS offer going forward under supervision, NXT will be. And then that's when footage, of course, got footage out of focus. Tony D'Angelo walking down the bridge, and Antonio appears in the ring behind Page. He's a spine buster and drops scrapping a black cloth on all ego. So and it's just like first Tony D'Angelo attacks Javon Evans, now it's going after Ethan Page. You know what I mean? But really got no real crowd reaction. Then of course, after that we have Sol Ruka versus Ren Sinclair, the winner by way of pinfall, Sol Ruka. And we saw that Zarya was in the audience just standing there. After the match, Sol Ruka chases Zarya after she leaves. As of course they have kind of have an argument, but eventually they make up and give each other a hug. And of course we saw the Fatal Influence made the entrance. Of course, going to the break, and we see JC Jane confront Kendall Gray, and says she's leaving a Cinderella story, going from obscurity to being an Iron Survivor, and she should know that this is as good as it's going to get. So yeah, like I said, pretty much. And of course, no one knows to tell the truth, but Jane has no problem being the bad guy. Potentially doesn't win championships, and she might have the Evolve Winners Championship on her shoulder, but the NXT title is a whole different level. Um, but yeah, just to see, like I said, just to see, um, you know, JC Jane, continue to improve, and improve by leaps and bounds as far as being a leader. You know, um, you know, and of course we have Hank and Tank being interviewed in kimonos, and we see the OCM roll up, and Tank says they haven't forgotten what they did to them before they left for Japan. Adds up to a match getting booked for next week, and that's since of course sends them in a break, sends them in a commercial break. And so we have Javon Evans versus Obafemi for the NXT Men's Championship. And for a minute, I nearly thought that Javon had it in the bag. It's up to the point where he was hitting numerous cutters or RKOs. Of course, we all know that there was interference, by way of Ricky Starks, and of course, Obafemi, of course, rose above all that and won by way of pinfall with a fall from grace. And of course, once again, your winner and still NXT Men's Champion Obafemi. And of course, once again, I'll say that the future of the WWE, is right there in NXT. And so, I think next week I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to get my year recap, if you will, and so some of that, pretty much that, and just my recap of review of Cena's last match, Saturday Night's Main Event. And with that being said, I'm going to my predictions for Saturday Night's Main Event. Meant to point out that as Lyra was going, Lyra Valkyrie was coming to the ring, Bayley accompanied her, and the camera pointed to Bayley. Talking to somebody in the audience, just clapped for them, whatever. Come to find out, it was Sol Ruka. And so it's confirmed that on Saturday Night's Main Event, it's going to be Sol Ruka versus Bayley. And so, in terms of the card itself, there's only 4 matches on the card, by the way. The opening match is going to be John Cena versus Gunther, Cody Rhodes versus Obafemi, Bayley versus Sol Ruka, and AJ Styles and Dragon Lee versus Javon Evans and Leon Slater. Even though it's only 4 matches, because it's in DC, I'm pretty excited about it. So my predictions, I have the Reign General Gunther winning. For the next match, I have Obafemi winning. For Bayley versus Sol Ruka, it's like Sol Ruka's the future, but Bayley's got the experience. So I might go with Bayley on that one. And then AJ Styles, Dragon Lee versus Javon Evans and Leon Slater. I'm going with the phenomenal AJ Styles and Dragon Lee. Those are my predictions. Those are my predictions for Saturday's main event. And it's been said that it's going to be huge, fan fest, food trucks and vendors and the whole 9 yards, the whole 10 yards, you name it. As a matter of fact, it's already been promoted. Fan fest from 2:30 to 6 p.m. featuring food trucks, merchandise, sign making stations, live music, and more. They're treating Saturday Night's Main Event like WWE World at WrestleMania. They're treating it like fan access at WrestleMania, because at fan access, you can make your own signs. So as far as that, and also, as we said, there's going to be He says that it's also said that you can record a special message to John Cena before his final match. And there's pre-registration required at eventsdc.com. Says bring your sons. Special guests will be live on the panel show. Live on the panel. The show will move inside from 7 to 8. And we have a post show as well, which will reside in the same location immediately following the event with more live events. So DC is going to be on fire on Saturday, and I absolutely cannot wait. This is absolute cinema. I'm excited. This is, makes this Christmas, will make this Christmas even more special. For John Cena to have his last match here in DC, it feels like a storybook ending, if you will. So that's pretty much it for me for tonight. And before I go, it's not going too much, too much for me to really dive into in this episode. But like I say, those are my predictions. And so, as far as birthdays, on December 7th, Larry Bird turned 69. Terrell Owens turned 52. Rick Rude will turn 67. John Moxley, formerly known as Dean Ambrose, turned 40. Jeffrey Wright turned 60. December 8th, Joy Reid turns 57. On December 9th, Kurt Angle turned 57. Mars Sade, formerly known as Shakara Jackson, turned 31. On December 10th, JTG, formerly from Primetime, turns 41. On December 11th, the greatest luchador of all time, Rey Mysterio, WWE Hall of Fame Rey Mysterio, turns 51. And so that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I like to give a word of wisdom, is that is that God does not see what you say; He sees what you do. So that's God doesn't see what you say; He sees what you do. He sees your works, He sees your actions, He sees your choices, He sees your behavior. And it's important to have somebody in your corner to hold you accountable, to tell you to sit down. If you don't, you are out of control. So, like I said, God sees what you do more than what you verbally say. Actions speak louder than words. So that's my word of wisdom. And always remember that you are victorious, because greater is He that's in you than he that's in the world. When we put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. And of course, you can also watch by way of YouTube, youtube.com/@VonResper Jr. Please make sure to like and subscribe for more great content. And thank you very much for watching and listening. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.